So what if I told you that whether a judge grants you parole doesn't actually depend on your crime or, your behavior in prison,
Oh.
or even if you're remorseful,
Right.
but it depends entirely on how many hours it's been since that judge had a sandwich.
It sounds completely absurd. It sounds like some cynical joke about the justice system, right?
Totally.
But the thing is, it actually happens to be a statistically verifiable fact. And it gets right to the core of what we're digging into today.
Exactly. Because, you walk around, I walk around, we all just sort of walk around believing we are the masters of our own minds.
Yeah, we think we're in the driver's seat.
Right. We think our decision making is this very clean, logical engine, like one conscious thought just perfectly leading to the next. But the truth we are exploring in this deep dive is that most of your mental work happens in total silence, completely behind the scenes.
And you are largely oblivious to the forces that are actually steering your life.
Yeah, which is terrifying, honestly.
It is. It's a profoundly humbling realization. I mean, when you start digging into the sources we have today, which, by the way, span decades of really pioneering research into human cognition, you realize that diagnosing the errors in our own judgment is just incredibly difficult.
Because we're so close to it.
Exactly. We're navigating some seriously muddy diagnostic waters here. And the mission today, for you listening, is to give you a richer, far more precise vocabulary to identify those errors.
Because right now, let's face it, most of us just don't have the words to describe what's actually misfiring in our heads. We just know,
Yeah.
oh, I made a bad call, or, my coworker made a weird choice.
Precisely. And let's be honest here, it is much easier and significantly more enjoyable to spot the mistakes of other people than to confront our own.
Oh, 100%. It's the classic office water cooler gossip. We all do it.
Yeah.
You stand around dissecting why, I don't know, marketing completely botched the product launch, or why your boss made that totally irrational hiring decision.
And that gossip is actually a brilliant evolutionary tool if you use it correctly.
Wait, really? Gossip?
Yes, absolutely. We want to give you the ultimate toolkit for intelligent gossip today, because anticipating how friends and colleagues are going to evaluate our choices is a really powerful motive for self-criticism.
Oh, I see. So if I know you're going to judge me, I'll think harder about it.
Exactly. If you have distinctive diagnostic labels for the systematic errors people make, what psychologists call cognitive biases, you can anticipate them. You can recognize them in the wild, understand the mechanics of why they happen, and ultimately maybe catch yourself before you make that same mistake.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can start diagnosing the glitches in the system, we have to meet the characters actually running the machinery in your head.
Right.
The central theme of all this source material is that your mind is not a single unified thing. It's more like a constant silent dialogue between two totally different characters, like this psychodrama playing out right behind your eyes.
Yeah, I think framing it as a psychodrama is very helpful, as long as we establish something really crucial right up front. Focusing on these mental errors does not denigrate human intelligence. It is not about proving that people are stupid.
Right, because that's the trap, right? Thinking, oh, humans are just irrational and dumb.
Exactly. Think of it like a medical textbook. A medical textbook focuses entirely on diseases, but that doesn't deny the existence of good health. Most of us are healthy most of the time, and our judgments are usually pretty appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, we get through the day, we cross the street without getting hit by cars, we manage to cook dinner without burning the house down.
Right. The errors we're going to explore today actually reveal the fascinating, highly efficient evolutionary design of our cognition. We make mistakes because our brains are optimized for survival in a really complex world, not necessarily for, perfect statistical logic.
So let's meet the two characters pulling the levers here. The researchers call them System 1 and System 2. Let's start with System 1.
It's a fast one.
Yeah, this is the fast one. It's automatic, it's effortless, and it is entirely unconscious. It's the part of your brain that instantly detects anger in someone's face from all the way across the room. Or it reads a billboard on the highway before you even decide you want to look at it. It's what drives your car on a completely empty road when you're spacing out and daydreaming. You don't consciously choose to do these things, they just happen to you.
And that is the defining trait of System 1.
Yeah.
It operates with absolutely no sense of voluntary control. It is always on, it's always scanning, always generating impressions.
Okay, so then you have System 2.
Right. This is the slow, deliberate, very effortful, conscious character.
The one we actually think we are.
Exactly. System 2 is what you use when you are trying to compute, say, 17 times 24 in your head. Or when you're trying to parallel park in a really tight space on a busy street, it requires your active, focused attention.
And here's the funny thing. When you think of yourself, like your core identity, you are thinking of System 2. We all identify with this conscious reasoning self that carefully weighs options and makes choices.
We like to think we're the CEO of our own brains.
Right. But the reality from the research is System 1 is the secret author of almost everything you do. System 2 just thinks it's in charge.
It is very much the supporting actor who is completely convinced they are the lead. And to understand just how limited System 2 really is, we have to look at how much energy it takes to operate.
Because it's not infinite.
Not at all. System 2 is defined by its ability to allocate attention. But that attention is a strictly finite resource.
Which brings us to probably the most famous psychological study of the modern era, the invisible gorilla experiment.
Oh, yes. Christopher Shabris and Daniel Simons created this. This is just a brilliant, simple test. So they filmed a short video of two teams passing basketballs back and forth. One team is wearing white shirts, and the other team is in black shirts. And when you sit down to watch it, you're given a very specific instruction. You are told to count the exact number of passes made by the players in white and completely ignore the players in black.
Which, by the way, is surprisingly difficult. Like, I've done this test. The players are weaving in and out. The balls are bouncing all over. And you really have to focus to filter out the black shirts and track the white shirts.
Your System 2 is working on overdrive.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a completely absorbing task.
Yeah.
You have to allocate almost all your conscious attention to it. Now, halfway through this short video, a woman wearing a full, highly realistic gorilla suit walks right into the middle of the basketball court.
Just casually strolls in.
She stops, she turns to the camera, thumps her chest, and then slowly walks off screen. She is in the frame for 9 solid seconds.
Yeah, 9 seconds is an eternity on video.
It really is. But when the video ends, the researchers ask the viewers, hey, did you notice anything unusual? And about half of the people who watch that video report seeing absolutely nothing out of the ordinary.
They completely miss a giant gorilla thumping its chest in the middle of the screen.
Because System 1 handles automatic seeing.
Yeah.
Your eyes physically registered the light bouncing off the gorilla.
Right, the retina saw it.
Yes. But to actually perceive it, to bring it into your conscious reality, that requires System 2 to allocate attention. When System 2 is overloaded with a demanding task like counting those basketball passes, it simply does not have the bandwidth to process the gorilla. You become effectively blind to the obvious.
And the craziest part is how people react when you tell them about it afterwards. Like, they don't just say, oh, oops, I missed it. They aggressively deny it was even there.
Yes, they become blind to their own blindness.
They just cannot imagine they would miss something so striking.
What's fascinating here is that this mental overload isn't just, a psychological metaphor. It takes a real measurable physical toll on your body.
Okay, right. The researchers demonstrated this using those mental sprints.
The add 1 and add 3 tasks.
Yeah, which honestly sound like absolute torture.
They're deeply uncomfortable. So in the add 1 experiment, you sit in a room and you listen to a steady metronome beating once per second. You hear a string of 4 random digits, let's say 5294.
Okay.
Your task is to add 1 to each of those digits and speak the new string back in time with the metronome. So 5294 becomes 6305.
Which is hard enough just keeping the rhythm. But then they push you to the limit.
Right, the add 3 task. You hear 5294, and you have to instantly calculate and say out loud 8527. This pushes the average human brain to its absolute cognitive limit. If you try it, you will literally feel your brain practically vibrating with effort.
But the researchers didn't just, ask people how hard it felt. They actually pointed a camera at their eyes. They used pupillometry, measuring the dilation of the pupil, as a literal window into how hard System 2 was working.
Because the pupil is incredibly sensitive to mental effort. In that basement lab, they found that during the add 3 task, the subject's pupils would dilate up to 50% of their original area.
50%?
Yeah, and their heart rates would increase by about 7 beats per minute. The pupil size follows this perfect inverted V shape on a graph. It grows wider and wider as the math gets harder. It peaks at the exact moment of maximum exertion, and then the very second the person either finds the answer or, just gives up because it's too hard.
It's agonizing.
Right. The pupil immediately snaps back to its normal size.
So the scientists could literally stand out in the hallway, look at a monitor showing a zoomed-in video of the subject's eye, and know the exact millisecond the person internally quit trying to solve the math problem without hearing a single word.
Yes. It's a biological tell.
Yeah.
Conversely, they found that when the subjects were just engaging in normal, everyday conversation and chatting about their day, Their pupils barely dilated at all.
Just coasting.
Coasting. It proves that our normal mental life is just a comfortable stroll. System 2 only sprints when it absolutely has to.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy because I think it really helps to visualize what's happening here. Think of System 2 like the electrical breaker box in your house.
Okay, I like that.
When you plug in too many appliances, it doesn't just dim all the lights equally across the entire house, right? It has a limited capacity, and when the system is threatened with a total overload, the breaker trips to protect the house. But System 2 is even smarter than a simple breaker. It selectively protects the most vital task and just drops the rest.
How so? Give me an example.
Well, think about driving. If you're cruising on an empty highway, System 1 is driving. You can listen to a podcast, you can talk to the passenger next to you, no problem.
Sure.
But the moment you have to merge onto a busy highway in a heavy rain surrounded by massive semi-trucks, what happens? Your System 2 takes over, and suddenly you literally go deaf to the passenger talking next to you.
You might even reach out and turn the radio down.
Exactly. You need all your electrical capacity for the vital task of not crashing the car, so your brain just cuts the power to your hearing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a brilliant evolutionary adaptation. That sophisticated allocation of attention kept our ancestors alive. Orienting quickly to the gravest threats improved our chances of survival.
Right, because conscious thought is slow.
Conscious thought System 2 is powerful, but it is agonizingly slow. It processes things sequentially. If you hit an oil slick on the road, System 1 takes over instantly. Your hands correct the steering wheel before you are even fully conscious of the threat.
Yeah, if you had to wait for System 2 to calculate the physics of the skid, you'd just be dead.
You would be dead.
So System 2 is this incredible, powerful, attention-allocating machine, but it has a fatal flaw. A flaw that dictates so much of how we live our lives, what we buy, who we vote for. And that flaw is that System 2 is incredibly, hopelessly lazy.
Psychologists call this the law of least effort. As a biological organism, we naturally gravitate toward the least demanding mental course of action. If there are several ways to achieve a goal, you will default to the one that requires the least mental exertion.
Because, as we saw with the pupil dilation and the heart rate, effort is a real physical cost.
Yeah, exactly.
And this leads us to a concept from the sources that completely changed how I view my own willpower. It's called ego depletion.
Ego depletion is the realization that self-control and cognitive effort draw from the exact same limited shared pool of mental energy.
Meaning, if I force myself to do something I don't want to do, like let's say I have to smile politely at a really rude customer for an hour, I literally have less energy later to solve a complex spreadsheet at my desk.
Exactly. Or if you spend all day resisting the urge to eat donuts in the break room, you're significantly more likely to snap at your spouse when you get home.
Wow.
The willpower required to suppress an emotion and the cognitive power required to do hard math, they pull from the exact same tank.
Which brings us back to the hook I started the show with. The Israeli parole judges. This study is just terrifying.
It is one of the most stark demonstrations of ego depletion in the literature. So these are highly experienced judges in Israel who spend entire days reviewing applications for parole. It is a grueling schedule.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They spend an average of just 6 minutes reviewing each case. Now, the default decision, the easy, safe decision for a judge, is to deny parole. Only about 35% of requests are approved overall.
Right, because approving parole requires mental effort. You have to weigh the risks, you have to read the file carefully, and you have to override the safe default. You actually have to use System 2.
Exactly. So researchers mapped out the proportion of approved parole requests strictly against the time elapsed since the judge's last food break. They get a morning snack break and a lunch break.
And the graph of this data is just unbelievable.
Right after a meal, the approval rate spikes to about 65%. The judges are refreshed. They have the mental energy to deeply consider the cases. But during the 2 hours until the next meal, the approval rate drops steadily.
And right before they take a break.
Before they eat again, the approval rate plunges to practically zero.
Zero. Literally, if your case is called at 11:55 a.m., you are staying in prison.
Because tired, hungry judges simply do not have the cognitive resources left to engage System 2. So they fall back on the easy default, which is the law of least effort. Leave the prisoner in jail. It requires no mental exertion to say no.
The implication there is just staggering. Justice isn't blind. It's just hungry.
Yeah.
And this laziness is so deeply built into us. There's this famous puzzle from the sources that proves how aggressively System 2 tries to avoid doing work. I want you, the person listening right now, to answer this in your head as fast as you can. Ready?
Go for it.
A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
Right.
I'll give you a second.
The beauty of this puzzle is what happened in your mind the very moment you heard it.
Right. An instant number screamed into your consciousness. 10 cents. It just feels right. It's intuitive, it's appealing, and it is completely 100% wrong.
Yes.
Because if the ball costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1 more than the ball, the bat would be $1.10. That would make the total $1.20.
The correct answer, of course, is 5 cents. The bat is $1.05. The total is $1.10.
But doing that math requires you to stop, reject the 10-cent answer that System 1 just handed you on a silver platter, and actually engage your System 2.
And most people just don't do it. Over 50% of students at elite universities, we're talking Harvard, MIT, Princeton, give the intuitive wrong answer of 10 cents.
Harvard students.
Yes. It reveals a profound reality about our minds. System 2 didn't bother to check the work. A few seconds of mental effort, just slightly tensing the muscles, slightly dilating the pupils, that would have prevented the error. But people actively avoid the cognitive effort. We are naturally prone to accept plausible-sounding answers without scrutiny.
So, wait, I'm listening to this and thinking, is my brain just a battery that constantly runs out of juice? Is there any way to work hard without draining the tank and making these lazy errors?
There is an exception, and it's a state called flow, a concept pioneered by the psychologist Molly Csikszentmihalyi.
I love that concept, just being in the zone.
Yes. Flow is a state of effortless concentration so deep that you actually lose your sense of time, of yourself, and of your problems. You see it in painters, musicians, coders, writers.
Right.
What's unique about flow is that performing a highly demanding cognitive task in this state requires absolutely no exertion of self-control.
So it completely bypasses ego depletion.
Precisely. Because you aren't fighting yourself to stay on task. You aren't spending energy on self-control. All your mental resources are directed entirely at the task itself. It is highly efficient.
But for the times we aren't in flow, which, let's be real, is most of the time, I have to ask, is this tank of energy thing just a metaphor? Like, when we say our brain is running out of gas after a long meeting, is that just poetry, or is it physical?
It is entirely biologically physical. Your nervous system consumes more glucose than almost any other part of your body. Effortful mental activity is highly expensive in the currency of glucose. When you are engaged in difficult cognitive reasoning or forcing yourself to maintain self-control, your blood glucose level actually drops.
So you are literally burning sugar to think.
Yes. The psychologist Roy Baumeister demonstrated this brilliantly. He had subjects watch a highly emotionally charged video, like a sad documentary. Half the subjects were told to completely suppress their emotional reactions. Keep a straight face, don't show any empathy.
Okay, which is hard.
Very. This is a task known to cause severe ego depletion because it requires massive self-control.
Got it.
After the video, they gave the subjects lemonade. But here's the trick.
Right.
Half the group drank lemonade sweetened with Splenda, a zero-calorie artificial sweetener. The other half drank lemonade sweetened with real caloric sugar. Then, all the participants were given a difficult cognitive task, much like that bat and ball puzzle.
Let me guess.
The Splenda group, whose brains were depleted from suppressing their emotions and received no glucose replenishment, showed the classic signs of depletion. They made intuitive errors. They gave up easily.
And the sugar group?
They performed exceptionally well. Restoring the brain's physical glucose supply completely restored their System 2's ability to override those intuitive errors.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. Think about your workday. If you have an important meeting where you need to be sharp, negotiate a contract, and avoid lazy intuitive thinking, do not schedule it at 11:30 a.m.
Absolutely not.
Structure it right after lunch. Or, if you absolutely have to do it then, literally drink a glass of actual lemonade or eat a piece of candy before you walk in.
It is a very practical, scientifically validated application. Don't make vital life decisions when your glucose is low.
Okay, so we've established that System 2 is frequently asleep at the wheel, or biologically depleted, or just naturally lazy. So what is System 1 doing while the boss is out to lunch?
It is doing what it does best. It is furiously, relentlessly making associations, constantly connecting dots, even when there are absolutely no dots to connect.
Let's try something right now to show how this works. I'm going to say 2 words to you. Bananas. Vomit.
And instantly, a whole cascade of uncontrollable physical and mental events just happen to the person listening.
Right. If you're listening to this, you probably just experienced a flash of unpleasant images. Your face might have twisted slightly in disgust without you even meaning to.
Your heart rate probably ticked up a tiny bit.
Yeah, the sweat glands on your palms might have activated, and it was completely automatic.
What happened just now is a process called associative activation. Your System 1 instantly assumed a temporal sequence and a causal connection between those two random words. It created a rapid, sketchy scenario in your head where the bananas caused the sickness.
It told a little story.
Yes, and as a result, you experienced a temporary aversion to bananas. But it goes even deeper than that. Your memory is now primed. Because those concepts are active, your brain is currently more prepared to recognize and respond to other related words.
Wait, like what?
If I flash the word nausea or fruit on a screen right now, you would recognize them milliseconds faster than you would have a minute ago. Each element supports the other in an associatively coherent pattern.
And what blows my mind is that System 1 treats the mere conjunction of two words, just me saying them out loud, as a representation of actual reality. Your body reacted to the idea of vomit as if there was actual danger in the room.
Which brings us to the astonishing power of priming. This is the psychological mechanism where exposure to one stimulus alters your behavior or your thoughts about something else, completely outside of your conscious awareness.
The classic example in the sources is the Florida effect, discovered by the psychologist John Bargh. This experiment is equal parts brilliant and, honestly, kind of spooky.
It is a foundational study. Bargh took a group of NYU students. These are young, healthy people, mostly 18 to 22 years old. He brought them into a room and asked them to assemble 4-word sentences from a scrambled set of words.
Just a basic language puzzle.
Just a puzzle. But for half the students, the scrambled words included terms subtly associated with the elderly. Words like Florida, forgetful, bald, gray, wrinkle.
But he never actually used the word old, right?
Exactly. The concept of old age was implied, but never explicitly stated. After the students completed this puzzle, they were told the experiment was over, and they needed to walk down the hall to another office for a second task.
But the puzzle wasn't the real experiment.
No. The walk down the hall was the actual test. The researchers had secretly set up hidden cameras and stopwatches to unobtrusively time how long it took the students to walk from one door to the next.
Yeah.
The results were shocking. The 18-year-old students, who had been primed with the elderly words, walked significantly more slowly down the hallway than the control group.
Just reading the word Florida and wrinkle physically slowed down their bodies, and they had absolutely no idea it was happening.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
When interviewed later, none of them noticed the theme of the words, and none of them believed their walking speed had changed. The idea of old age had not come to their conscious awareness, but it had successfully primed a behavior associated with old age. Psychologists call this the ideomotor effect, an idea influencing motor action.
And it works in reverse, too. The body can prime the mind. If you tell subjects to put on headphones and pace around a room at 1/3 their normal walking speed, literally forcing them to walk like an elderly person, they are suddenly much quicker to recognize words related to old age on a computer screen.
The association flows both ways, mind to body and body to mind.
My absolute favorite example of this reverse priming is the pencil trick. If you take a pencil and hold it horizontally between your teeth, it forces your facial muscles into the biological shape of a smile.
Right. And if you hold it by pursing your lips around the eraser end, pointing it straight out, it forces your face into a frown.
So researchers had people hold the pencil in these ways and then had them read Gary Larson's The Far Side comic strips. The people forced to smile by the pencil rated the cartoons as significantly funnier than the people forced to frown.
Because your System 1 feels your face smiling and says, well, I must be amused. This comic is hilarious.
That's so wild.
There was another brilliant variation using radio editorials. Participants were told they were testing the physical design of new headphones. Half were told to test the headphones by nodding their head up and down.
Like saying yes.
Right. The other half tested them by shaking their head from side to side. While doing this, they listened to a radio editorial arguing a specific political point.
Let me guess. The nodders agreed with the radio.
Overwhelmingly. The nodding group making a physical yes gesture tended to accept the message they heard. The shaking group making a no gesture rejected it. There is a habitual unconscious connection between our physical expressions and our cognitive attitudes.
This all sounds pretty harmless when we're talking about comics and headphones, but the sources show how this manipulation scales up into real life. Let's talk about the honesty box experiment in that British university office.
This is a perfect example of real-world priming. So in this office kitchen, staff members paid for their tea and coffee by dropping coins into an honesty box. There was no cashier. It was entirely based on the honor system. A price list was posted on the wall.
Pretty standard.
The researchers decided to quietly run an experiment. Right above the price list, they pinned a small poster. One week, the poster was a lovely photograph of flowers. The next week, they swapped it for a photograph of a pair of human eyes staring directly outward. And they alternated this week by week.
Just a picture of eyes, not even a real person.
Just a printout. But the results were dramatic. The researchers tracked the amount of money dropped in the box versus the amount of milk consumed. During the weeks when the staring eyes were looking down at them, the office staff contributed nearly 3 times as much money as they did during the flower weeks.
They felt watched. Even though System 2 perfectly well knew it was just a piece of paper, System 1 reacted to the prime of being observed, and it completely altered their moral behavior.
Yes, a purely symbolic, unconscious reminder of observation triggered a profound behavioral shift toward honesty.
But primes can trigger the opposite, too. Kathleen Voss's research on money primes is honestly kind of depressing. If you just have a stack of Monopoly money sitting on a desk in the periphery of someone's vision, or like a computer screensaver showing dollar bills floating in water, people change.
They really do. The prime of money triggers individualism. Participants primed with money persevere almost twice as long on difficult, unsolvable puzzles before asking the researchers for help. They become highly self-reliant.
Which sounds good until you look at how they treat others. The researchers staged a moment where a clumsy person walks by and drops a bunch of pencils on the floor.
Yeah.
The people who saw the floating dollar bills picked up significantly fewer pencils for the stranger than the control group. When they were asked to set up chairs for a one-on-one conversation, the money-primed people placed the chairs much farther apart.
Money primes a reluctance to be involved with others, a preference to be alone, and a distinct lack of helpfulness.
So here's where it gets really interesting and deeply uncomfortable. I read this and my immediate reaction was defense. I thought, wait, are we just meat robots?
It's a natural reaction.
Right, because if a screensaver of floating dollar bills can make me less compassionate to a stranger dropping pencils, or a picture of eyes can make me pay for my coffee, how much free will do I actually have? Because my System 2 certainly feels like it's making all the choices.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your discomfort is entirely valid. And it is the precise reaction most people have when confronted with this data. We are discovering that our subjective experience of life consists largely of the story that System 2 tells itself about what is going on.
It's just a story.
System 2 writes a fiction that it is in control. But System 1 is the secret author behind the curtain, constantly being nudged by the environment.
It makes you look at the world totally differently.
It should. Think about the broader societal implications here. If subtle, unconscious reminders of money make us more selfish and less connected, what does a highly commercialized culture, where we are bombarded with financial imagery every single minute of the day, do to our collective psyche?
It basically primes isolation on a mass scale.
Exactly. And consider the dark side in authoritarian societies. The ubiquitous portraits of the dear leader or big brother looking down from every wall and every public square. It isn't just about consciously conveying state power. From a psychological standpoint, those staring eyes are actively priming obedience and reducing spontaneous independent thought in the citizenry, constantly, without them ever even realizing it.
That is heavy. So System 1 is this sponge, constantly reacting to primes in the environment. But it isn't just reacting blindly. The sources describe it as having a sort of internal dashboard, like a dial that it's constantly checking to measure how safe and familiar the world is at any given second.
Yes, psychologists call this the assessment of cognitive ease. System 1 is continuously monitoring multiple variables in the background. Is there a threat? Is anything new going on? Am I recognizing these patterns? Should attention be redirected?
And when all those answers are positive, the dial points to cognitive ease.
Exactly. When you are in a state of cognitive ease, it means things are going well. You are likely in a good mood, you tend to believe what you hear, you trust your intuitions, and the situation feels comfortably familiar. You're essentially letting your guard down.
And the opposite.
The opposite end of the dial is cognitive strain, which is a state of tension that immediately mobilizes System 2 to figure out what's wrong.
And because we crave the comfort of cognitive ease, it can be easily manipulated, which leads to some wild illusions. Like, The illusion of remembering.
Also known as the David Stenbill effect,
Yeah.
from a classic experiment by Larry Jacobi.
Right. So if I give you a made-up name right now, David Stenbill, you know it's a made-up name. I literally just told you I made it up. But if I ask you to look at a list of minor celebrities in a few days and slip the name David Stenbill onto that list, you are highly likely to identify him as a real famous person.
Yes.
You won't know why. You won't remember this conversation. You'll just look at the name and have this vague sense of pastness or familiarity.
And your brain automatically mistakes that familiarity for fame. Why? Because words you have seen before are physically easier for your brain to process the second time around. The neural pathways are already greased.
That makes sense.
You experience greater cognitive ease when reading the name David Stenbill. And System 1, which is not very smart, simply misinterprets that biological ease as, oh, I know this person, they must be famous.
But it gets worse. System 1 doesn't just confuse ease with familiarity, it confuses ease with truth, the illusion of truth.
This is absolutely critical for understanding misinformation. The researchers demonstrated this using arbitrary trivia. If people are repeatedly exposed to a phrase like the body temperature of a chicken, just the phrase itself over and over, later they are presented with a totally arbitrary statement. The body temperature of a chicken is 144 degrees.
Which is false.
It is entirely false. But the people who are repeatedly exposed to the first half of the sentence are significantly more likely to accept the entire statement as true.
Just because they heard the first part before.
Yes. The familiarity of the words body temperature of a chicken makes the whole sentence feel cognitively easy to process. And to System 1, ease equals truth. A reliable way to make people believe in falsehoods is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from truth.
This section of the sources is literally a masterclass for you, the listener, on how to write a persuasive message. If you are writing a memo to your boss or designing a marketing campaign and you really want people to believe you, you have to maximize cognitive ease.
How do you do that? What are the tactics?
You reduce strain. If you are printing a document, use high-quality paper. If you are sending an email, use high-contrast fonts. Bright blue or bright red text is believed more readily than pale shades of green or yellow, because pale text causes slight visual strain.
And linguistically, do not use complex, erudite language when simple words will do.
Yes, people think using big words makes them sound smart, but the research shows the exact opposite. Pretentious language causes cognitive strain for the reader, and because of that strain, the reader unconsciously perceives the writer as having poor intelligence and lower credibility.
Furthermore, if you want your message to be accepted as true, make it rhyme.
Oh, the O.J. Simpson defense. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Precisely. Experiments show that aphorisms like woes unite foes are judged by participants as profoundly more insightful than a non-rhyming equivalent like woes unite enemies.
That's crazy.
The rhyme increases the ease of processing, which System 1 translates as profound truth.
And if you quote a source, make sure it has a name that is easy to pronounce. In one experiment, stock reports from a fictional company named Artin were trusted far more and evaluated far more positively than identical reports from a fictional company named Tahat.
Clunky, unpronounceable names induce cognitive strain. System 2 is lazy. Mental effort is aversive, and we actively distrust things that make us work hard to understand them.
But strain isn't always a bad thing, right? Because sometimes we actually need to wake up System 2. Like, remember the bat and ball puzzle, the $10 one where everyone guesses 10 cents.
Right, of course.
Researchers took that puzzle and a few others like it in what's called the cognitive reflection test, and they gave it to a group of university students, but they manipulated the cognitive ease.
Oh, right.
For half the students, it was printed in a normal, clear font. But for the other half, they printed the test in a washed-out, barely legible, small, pale gray font.
The results beautifully illustrate the dual system mind. When the font was normal and easy to read, 90% of the students made at least one intuitive mistake on the test.
Wow, 90%.
But when the font was barely legible, when it caused physical visual strain to just read the words, the error rate plummeted to 35%.
So by making it harder to read, they literally made the students smarter.
Exactly. The visual cognitive strain disrupted the comfortable state of cognitive ease. It essentially sounded an alarm that said, "Things are difficult right now, wake up." This mobilized System 2. And once System 2 was engaged by the visual strain, it stayed awake long enough to actually check the math and reject the intuitive wrong answer suggested by System 1.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on something here. Because a minute ago you said that being in a state of cognitive ease means you're probably in a good mood, and that's usually a good thing.
Yes.
But you also just said that cognitive ease makes us gullible to things like rhyming phrases and fake chicken temperature. So does being in a good mood make us gullible?
This raises a really important question about the evolutionary trade-offs of human emotion. Let me explain it using an experiment done by German psychologists. They use something called the remote association test. This involves finding a single shared word that connects three seemingly disparate words.
Like what? Give me an example.
For example, the words cottage, Swiss, cake.
Oh, cheese. Cottage cheese, Swiss cheese, cheesecake. I love these puzzles.
They are fun, but they are tricky. The researchers presented subjects with triads of words. Half the triads had a solution, like the cheese example. The other half were complete nonsense. They had no connecting word.
Okay.
The subjects were shown the triad for only 2 seconds and had to instantly guess if it was solvable or not, without actually figuring out the answer.
So relying entirely on intuition, just a gut feeling.
Yes. But here was the manipulation. Before the test, they altered the subjects' moods. They had some participants think about happy memories to put them in a great mood, and others think about depressing memories to put them in a bad mood.
And what happened?
The participants in a good mood were incredibly accurate. Their intuitive accuracy more than doubled compared to a baseline group. They could literally feel that a triad of words had a hidden solution before their conscious mind knew what it was. Cognitive ease allowed their associative machinery to run freely and spot the hidden patterns.
And the bad mood group.
The bad mood completely destroyed their intuition. Their accuracy at guessing if a triad was solvable dropped to random chance. They were totally disconnected from their intuitive System 1.
Wow.
It makes sense biologically. A good mood is a biological signal that the environment is safe, there are no immediate threats, and it is acceptable to let your guard down. This loosens System 2's vigilant control and unleashes System 1's creativity and associative power.
So it's a trade-off.
A bad mood, however, is an evolutionary signal of a threat. It demands vigilance. It demands that you stop relying on gut feelings and analyze your surroundings carefully.
So a good mood makes us more creative and highly intuitive, but the trade-off is that it makes us less vigilant and way more prone to logical errors and gullibility.
Exactly. You want to be in a good mood when you're brainstorming ideas for a novel. You want to be in a slightly bad vigilant mood when you are proofreading a contract or doing your taxes.
So what does this all mean for how we perceive reality? Because System 1 prefers the comfort of cognitive ease, it seems like it's actively forcing the world to make sense even when the world is chaotic. Which brings us to perhaps the most important acronym in the entire deep dive today, WYSIAD.
What you see is all there is, WYSIAD. It is the defining characteristic of System 1. When faced with making a judgment, System 1 excels at constructing the best possible, most coherent story that incorporates only the ideas currently activated in your working memory.
It just connects whatever dots it has.
Right. But crucially, it cannot allow for information it does not have. It doesn't pause and say, wait, what facts am I missing here? Information that is not retrieved from memory might as well not exist. System 1 builds a coherent story out of fragments and then treats that story as absolute reality.
And this need for coherence causes massive errors in judgment, like the halo effect. If we like a politician's views on the economy, WYSIAD ensures we also assume we like his voice, his posture, and his morals. We take one known attribute and spread that positive or negative light over everything else to keep our story coherent.
The Solomon Asch experiment perfectly illustrates the power of the halo effect in WYSIAD. Asch asked people to evaluate the personalities of two hypothetical individuals, Alan and Ben, based on a list of traits.
Okay, let's hear the traits.
Alan is described with these traits: intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, envious.
Okay.
Ben is described with the exact same traits, but in the reverse order: envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, intelligent.
It's literally the exact same list of words.
Yes. But when people are asked who they like more, they overwhelmingly choose Alan, and they think Ben is a problem.
Because sequence matters.
Exactly. The early traits anchor the emotional interpretation of the entire person. Because of WYSIAD, your System 1 starts building a coherent story immediately. When you hear that Alan is intelligent and industrious, you form a positive halo. So when you hear he is stubborn, you justify it. You think, well, smart people have to be stubborn to get things done.
But with Ben, the first word is envious.
Right. Ben starts with a negative halo. So when you finally get to the word intelligent at the very end of Ben's list, you don't think it's a good thing. You think an envious, stubborn man who is also intelligent. He's dangerous. System 1 suppresses the ambiguity of the later words to maintain the coherent story generated by the first impression.
We are just completely obsessed with causality. We cannot handle randomness. We demand a story. There was a detail in the sources about Hyder's triangles. It was a short film made in the 1940s.
Oh, yes.
It just shows a large black triangle, a small black triangle, and a circle moving around a box on a screen.
Yeah.
Literally just geometric shapes sliding around.
But that is not what viewers see.
No. People watch it and instantly see a drama. They see an aggressive bully triangle, a terrified victim circle, and a heroic rescue. We project intention, emotion, and causality onto literally random movements of shapes.
The brain is a causality-seeking engine. Nassim Taleb provided a stark, real-world example of how dangerous this need for a coherent story can be, specifically regarding the financial media. He observed the bond market on the day Saddam Hussein was captured in Iraq.
This is a perfect example of WISIAD.
It was a massive news day. In the morning, bond prices initially rose. The financial reporters needed a causal story to explain the rise, so Bloomberg News flashed the headline, U.S. Treasuries rise, Hussein capture may not curb terrorism.
They confidently link the capture to the price going up.
Exactly. But half an hour later, the bond prices fluctuated and fell back down. Just a totally normal market correction. But the journalists needed a new story, so the revised headline read, U.S. Treasuries fall, Hussein capture boosts allure of risky assets.
They use the exact same historical event to definitively explain entirely contradictory outcomes.
Because a large event is supposed to have consequences. System 1 is incredibly adept at finding a coherent causal story that links whatever fragments of knowledge it currently has. Those headlines didn't actually explain the market dynamics at all. They merely satisfied the human brain's desperate need for WISIAD coherence.
Okay, so we're trapped in this halo effect. We're constantly building fake stories based on whatever limited info we have. How do we break it? What is the practical tool for the listener to fight WISIAD?
The primary solution, developed through statistical observation, is to decorrelate error.
Decorrelate error. Unpack that for me.
James Surowiecki explored this beautifully in his book, The Wisdom of Crowds. If you take a large jar of pennies and ask a large group of people to guess how many pennies are inside, the individual guesses will be wildly, disastrously wrong. Some will guess 100, some will guess 10,000.
But if you average them together...
If you average all the independent guesses together, the final result is often remarkably, almost magically accurate. It is usually within a few percentage points of the true number. Why? Because while everyone makes errors, those errors are random. Some guess too high, some guess too low. When you average them, the independent errors cancel each other out. The error averages out to zero, leaving only the signal.
But there is a catch.
A massive catch. This magic only works if the observations are truly, strictly independent. People cannot know what other people are guessing. If the first person shouts out 10,000, the halo effect and WISIAD take over, and everyone else will adjust their guesses upward to align with the first speaker.
And the errors become correlated.
Exactly. The errors become correlated, and the wisdom of the crowd is completely destroyed.
Which is exactly why police officers are trained to separate witnesses immediately at a crime scene. If 3 witnesses to a bank robbery sit in the same room and talk before the police interview them, they influence each other. One says, I think he had a blue jacket, and the other 2 internalize that. Their errors correlate.
Precisely. To get the truth, you must decorrelate the error by keeping their observations independent.
I can see exactly how you apply this to the listener's workplace. Think about your average team meeting. You're sitting around a conference table trying to solve a problem. Usually the boss, or just the loudest, most confident person in the room, speaks first. They lay out their opinion.
Yes.
And because of the halo effect and WISIAD, what happens? Everyone else's opinions unconsciously start bending to align with that first speaker. You completely lose the wisdom of the crowd.
You get a false consensus.
So to decorrelate error in your own life, before anyone speaks in a meeting, have everyone write their ideas or their estimates down independently on a piece of paper. Collect the papers, then read them. You force independence.
It is a highly effective, empirically proven strategy to overcome one of our most dangerous biases. Because WISIAD doesn't just make us wrong, it makes us dangerously overconfident.
Yeah.
We must constantly remind ourselves that the subjective confidence we feel is determined entirely by the internal coherence of the story we manage to construct, not by the quality or the quantity of the actual data. You can build a very confident, very coherent story from almost no information at all.
And when System 1 is faced with a difficult question where it really lacks the data to make a coherent story, it performs this neat little magic trick. It doesn't say, I don't know. It simply answers a totally different question.
This is the cognitive mechanism of substitution. It is how we handle complexity. When you are faced with a difficult target question, for example, a complex analytical problem, System 1 frequently and unconsciously substitutes an easier heuristic question in its place.
And a heuristic is just a mental shortcut.
Yes. System 1 answers the easier heuristic question and then seamlessly applies that answer to the original difficult target question without you ever realizing a switch took place.
And this happens visually, too. We literally have an optical illusion that proves substitution is a hardware feature of the brain, the 3D size heuristic.
The visual illustration in the source material is striking. It is a simple drawing of a hallway, drawn in perspective so it looks like it's receding into the distance. Drawn onto this hallway are 3 identical figures of men.
Identical. You could take a ruler to the page and the ink used to draw all 3 men is exactly the same height.
Exactly. They are 2D figures printed on a flat page. The target question you are asked is, as printed on the page, is the figure on the right larger than the figure on the left?
A pure 2D question, and the conscious answer should be no, they are identical. But when you look at the picture, your brain absolutely screams that the figure on the right, the one that appears to be further down the hallway, is vastly, immensely larger than the one on the left.
Even with a ruler sitting right next to it, proving they are identical, your perceptual system automatically interprets the 2D drawing as a 3D scene. It substituted the difficult 2D analytical question for an automatic 3D question. How tall are these people in the real world?
Because if an object further down a hallway takes up the same amount of your retina as an object up close, the distant object must be huge.
Your brain substituted the question, and you cannot turn this visual illusion off, no matter how hard System 2 tries.
And the exact same substitution happens with our emotions and our life choices. There was a survey given to German students that exposes this perfectly.
The dating survey.
Right. Researchers asked these students 2 questions. First, how happy are you these days? Second, how many dates did you have last month? When they asked the questions in that order, happiness first, dates second, there was essentially 0 correlation in the data. Whether a student went on 0 dates or 10 dates didn't seem to drive their overall assessment of their life happiness.
But then the researchers performed a simple manipulation. They took a different group of students and simply reversed the order of the 2 questions. First, they asked, how many dates did you have last month? And then immediately followed up with, how happy are you these days?
And suddenly the correlation was massive.
Yes. Asking about their dating life first emotionally primed them. It forced them to think about a highly emotionally charged aspect of their lives. If they had been on many dates, they were reminded of romance and felt happy. If they had been on 0 dates, they were reminded of loneliness and felt sad.
So when the difficult target question immediately followed, how happy are you with your life in general, which is a huge, complex, philosophical question.
System 1 substituted the easier heuristic question, how do I feel about my love life right now? They simply took their current emotional state regarding their dates and substituted it as the answer for their entire life satisfaction.
Which brings us to a massive concept proposed by the researcher Paul Slovic, the affect heuristic. Affect meaning emotion. Our likes and dislikes literally determine our factual beliefs about the world.
It is the ultimate substitution. We substitute, how do I feel about it, for what do I think about it? If you love a certain new technology, like artificial intelligence, or if you support a certain political candidate, your positive emotion dictates your risk assessment. You automatically assume the benefits of AI are extremely high and the risks are virtually non-existent. If you hate the technology, you assume the risks are apocalyptic and the benefits are trivial.
Your emotional attitude drives your reality. But here's what I want to know. Do people realize they are doing this? If I ask a friend about their life happiness, do they know they were just telling me about their recent dates? Do they know they made the switch?
Almost never. System 2 rarely notices the substitution. The process relies on 2 mechanics. The first is what Kahneman calls the mental shotgun. We often compute much more than we intend to. For example, if I ask you if the word vote and the word goat rhyme.
They do. Vote, goat.
Yes. But studies show you are slightly slower to answer that than if I ask you if vote and note rhyme.
Oh, because vote and goat are spelled differently. V-O-T-E versus G-O-A-T.
Exactly. Your target question was strictly about sound. But your mental shotgun automatically fired and processed the spelling discrepancy anyway, even though it was completely irrelevant. That extra computation caused a microscopic delay. The mental shotgun scatters, gathering all sorts of unrequested associative information.
So the shotgun gathers the current mood, the spelling, the recent memories. Then what?
Then System 1 uses a process called intensity matching. It translates the intensity of one dimension onto another. For instance, it can seamlessly match the intensity of a child's early reading ability, say reading fluently at age 3, to the intensity of a predicted college GPA. It feels entirely natural to say, he read early, so he will definitely be a 3.8 student. A lazy System 2 simply rubber stamps this substituted intensity-matched answer without realizing the original statistically complex question was completely bypassed.
And this tendency to substitute feeling for fact, to use the shotgun and intensity matching, brings us to our absolute greatest vulnerability. The one thing our brains are just fundamentally not built to do: understand statistics.
We are pattern seekers. We are storytellers. We naturally think causally, not statistically. And this causes us to see patterns and causes where none actually exist.
Consider the kidney cancer paradox. This is a brilliant example from the sources. A massive demographic study revealed that the counties in the United States with the lowest incidence of kidney cancer are mostly rural, sparsely populated, and traditionally Republican counties located in the Midwest, the South, and the West.
And instantly, your System 1's causal machinery kicks in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I immediately start building a story. I think, well, they live in the country, they have clean living, fresh air, no water pollution, less stress, maybe they eat food grown on their own farms. It's a very satisfying, coherent story.
It is extremely tempting. But then you turn the page in the study and look at the counties with the highest incidence of kidney cancer in the United States. And they are also mostly rural, sparsely populated, and traditionally Republican counties located in the Midwest, the South, and the West.
Wait, that breaks the story. High cancer rates and low cancer rates can't both be caused by rural living.
Exactly. If you wanted to force a causal story, you could playfully argue that the high rates are due to rural poverty, high-fat diets, excessive alcohol, and lack of access to good medical care. But the truth is, both causal stories are completely wrong. There is no causal story at all.
So what's the real reason?
The key factor is simply the phrase sparsely populated. Rural counties have very small populations. And a fundamental rule of statistics, the law of small numbers, states that extreme outcomes, both exceptionally high and exceptionally low, are mathematically much more likely to occur in small sample sizes.
Because a single sick person wildly skews the percentage in a town of 100 people, but vanishes in a city of 1 million, it's like flipping a coin. If I flip a coin 4 times, I might actually get 100% heads. That's an extreme outcome. But if I flip a coin 4,000 times, I will never get 100% heads. It will settle right around 50%.
Precisely. The kidney cancer variance is a statistical artifact, not a medical reality. But our minds absolutely hate statistical regularities. We demand causes. We refuse to believe things are just random.
Like during World War II, the V-2 rocket bombings in London.
A perfect historical example. During the Blitz, Londoners mapped out where the German V-2 rockets were landing. They noticed that the rockets were hitting in distinct clusters, leaving conspicuous gaps in certain neighborhoods. The immediate causal story that spread through the city was that German spies were living in the untouched neighborhoods, and the rockets were being deliberately guided away from them.
Which is a terrifying story if you live next to a gap, but after the war, they analyzed the data.
A careful spatial statistical analysis proved that the distribution of the rocket hits was entirely perfectly typical of a genuinely random process. Randomness does not look like a perfectly evenly spaced grid. Randomness often appears as clusters. But System 1 sees a cluster and screams, pattern, cause, spies.
We do it with sports, too, the illusion of the hot hand in basketball. Fans, players, and coaches all swear that a player is hot or in the zone after sinking 3 or 4 shots in a row. They will pass that player the ball, expecting them to not miss.
But extensive analysis of thousands of shooting sequences in professional basketball proves the hot hand does not actually exist. The sequence of hits and misses by a player is indistinguishable from random coin flips. It's just a random sequence that happens to look like a pattern to a causality-hungry brain.
The basketball thing is harmless. But the real-world danger of ignoring the law of small numbers is profound. Let's talk about the Gates Foundation, because this statistical blind spot cost them over $1 billion.
It is a sobering case study in philanthropy. The Gates Foundation genuinely wanted to improve education. They invested $1.7 billion into creating smaller schools. Why? Because researchers had analyzed the data and noticed a pattern. The schools at the very top of the performance rankings, the best schools in the country, tended to be unusually small.
And boom, System 1 builds a causal story. Small schools means smaller class sizes, more personal attention from teachers, a tighter community. Therefore, small schools create better students.
A completely coherent, intuitively satisfying story. So they broke up large schools and built small ones.
But they didn't look at the bottom of the list.
Exactly. If the researchers had bothered to ask about the characteristics of the worst performing schools in the country, they would have seen that the worst schools were also disproportionately small.
It's the kidney cancer paradox all over again.
Precisely. Small schools are simply more variable because of the law of small numbers. A few brilliant students or a few struggling students can wildly swing a small school's average. They aren't better on average. In fact, large empirical studies eventually show that larger schools actually tend to produce slightly better results because they can offer more varied curriculum options and specialized teachers. Over $1 billion of well-intentioned money was misdirected because highly intelligent people fell for a cognitive illusion about sample sizes.
That is wild. And it leads us to another massive statistical blind spot that completely hijacks our decision-making. Anchoring.
Anchoring is when the first piece of information you hear dramatically influences your subsequent judgments, even if that first piece of information is completely irrelevant.
You know, Amos Tversky did a classic experiment to prove how absurd this is. They literally rigged a carnival wheel of fortune.
They did. They built a wheel that was rigged to only ever stop on two numbers, 10 or 65. They would bring university students into a room, spin the wheel in front of them, and have them watch it stop on, say, 65. Then, they immediately asked them a two-part question regarding a topic they likely knew very little about. Is the percentage of African nations in the United Nations higher or lower than the number you just saw on the wheel? And then, what is your best guess of the actual percentage of African nations in the UN?
So to be clear, they are watching a literal game show wheel generate a random number and then guessing a geopolitical statistic.
A completely uninformative number. Yet the anchoring effect was massive. The students who saw the wheel stop at 10 guessed, on average, that African nations made up 25% of the UN. Those who saw the wheel stop at 65 guessed an average of 45%.
A 20-point swing based on a rigged carnival wheel. The estimate stayed close to the anchor. And this works via priming, right? Like if I ask you, was Gandhi 144 years old when he died? You obviously know that's wrong. No one lives to 144.
Right. System 2 instantly rejects it.
But just my mention of the number 144 primed your associative machinery. Your System 1 starts frantically generating images of ancient age, extreme frailty, century-old people. So when I then ask, okay, how old was he really? Your final guess will be significantly higher than if my original anchor had been, was Gandhi 35 years old when he died?
Exactly. Anchoring is an automatic manifestation of System 1 trying its best to construct a world in which the anchor is the true number. It primes the pump with associated memories. And what is most alarming is that expertise does not protect you from it.
The real estate agents.
Yes. Researchers took a group of professional real estate agents to a house that was actually for sale. They gave them a comprehensive booklet of information about the house and the neighborhood. Crucially, the booklet included an asking price. Half the agents saw a ridiculously high asking price. Half saw an artificially low asking price. They were then asked to appraise the house's true value.
And these are professionals who do this for a living.
The anchor moved their professional evaluations by 41%. It was nearly the exact same anchoring effect seen in business school students who had absolutely no real estate experience. The only difference was that the students openly admitted they were influenced by the asking price, while the professionals fiercely denied it, claiming they only looked at the fundamentals.
The subconscious is doing the math. It even happens in the courtroom. Tell the listener about the German judges.
This is perhaps the most concerning example. Researchers took German judges with an average of 15 years of experience on the bench. They gave them a description of a woman who had been caught shoplifting. Then, the researchers had the judges roll a pair of loaded dice. The dice were secretly rigged to only land on a total of either 3 or 9.
Rolling dice to decide a sentence.
After rolling the dice, the judges were asked if the prison sentence they would give this woman should be higher or lower in months than the number on the dice. Finally, they were asked for their exact sentence. The judges who rolled a 9 gave an average sentence of 8 months. The judges who rolled a 3 gave an average sentence of 5 months.
The random roll of dice altered a woman's hypothetical prison sentence by 3 months. Experienced judges.
The anchoring effect is one of the most robust and reliable phenomena in experimental psychology.
Okay, so practical advice for you, the listener. If you are ever in a negotiation, buying a car, negotiating a salary, haggling over a contract, always make the first offer. You want to drop the anchor. If you are selling a house, set a high list price. If you are asking for a raise, ask for an extreme initial number. You will pull their counteroffer toward your anchor.
That is the offensive strategy. But it raises an important question. How do you play defense? How do you protect yourself when someone else drops an extreme anchor on you?
How do you unanchor yourself?
Psychologists suggest a deliberate, effortful strategy of thinking the opposite. You must recognize that an anchor has been set, and then deliberately force your system to focus your attention and search your memory for arguments against the anchor.
So if someone asks for a crazy high salary, I shouldn't just think about how to chip it down.
No. You should immediately focus on the absolute minimum offer they would accept, or focus on all the reasons why their proposal would fail. By actively searching for contradictory information, you negate the biased, unconscious recruitment of thoughts that the anchor triggered in your system 1. You have to fight fire with deliberate cognitive effort.
Okay, so anchors come from the outside world. There are numbers thrown at us, but our final major bias comes from inside our own heads, from our own memories. The science of availability.
The availability heuristic. This is the process of judging the frequency or probability of an event by the sheer ease with which instances of that event come to mind.
Let's use the marital chores study to explain this, because I think everyone who has ever lived with another human being will relate to this.
It is a very common dynamic. Researchers asked married couples to estimate what percentage of the household chores they personally completed. How much of the garbage taking out do you do? How much of the dishwashing? When you take the husband's estimate and the wife's estimate and add them together,
the total is inevitably way over 100%, like 130%. They both think they are doing the lion's share.
Yes. And it is important to note, this is not necessarily self-serving or malicious. Both spouses simply remember their own individual efforts, sweeping the floor, doing the laundry, much more clearly and easily than they remember their partner doing it. You are there for 100% of your own effort, but you don't always see your partner's. The difference in the availability of the memories leads directly to a difference in the judged frequency of the work.
But here's a nuance I want to dig into. When we say availability, is it just the sheer number of memories we can retrieve, or is it the feeling of how easy it is to retrieve them? Norbert Schwartz did an experiment on assertiveness that answers this perfectly.
Schwartz's experiment is brilliant. He asked one group of people to list 6 specific instances where they behaved assertively in their lives. He asked the second group to list 12 instances of their own assertiveness. After they finished writing, he asked both groups to rate how assertive they thought they were overall as a person.
Logically, the people who just wrote down 12 examples of being assertive should feel way more assertive than the people who only wrote down 6.
But the experiment produced a paradox. The people asked to list 12 instances actually rated themselves as less assertive than the people asked for 6.
Even though they had twice as much proof. Why?
Because of the cognitive strain. Coming up with the first 3 or 4 examples of being assertive is easy for most people. But getting to the 10th, 11th, or 12th example requires intense mental effort. You have to really search your memory. System 2 experiences this sudden difficulty, this unexplained cognitive strain. And System 1 interprets that strain to mean, wow, if I'm having this much trouble finding examples of my own assertiveness, I must actually be a very timid person.
The ease of retrieval completely trumps the sheer number of facts retrieved.
Yes. The feeling of difficulty overrules the data.
And this is where the availability heuristic goes from being a quirky psychological trick to something that literally shapes the modern world, because the media manipulates availability constantly.
Let's look at Paul Slovik's studies on how we perceive risk and death.
Slovik asked people to estimate the relative frequency of various causes of death. He asked them to compare pairs, for example, diabetes versus accidents.
And the public judged accidents to be 300 times more likely to cause death than diabetes.
Which is wildly incorrect. The statistical reality is that diabetes is actually 4 times more lethal than accidents.
They asked about lightning versus botulism. People thought death by lightning was less likely than botulism, even though lightning is 52 times more frequent. Because tornadoes, plane crashes, and botulism outbreaks get massive, dramatic, continuous media coverage. They produce vivid, terrifying imagery. Those images are incredibly easy to retrieve from memory. They are highly available. Diabetes, on the other hand, is silent. Asthma is silent. Our expectations about the frequency of events are completely distorted by the emotional intensity and the prevalence of the messages we are exposed to.
But hold on, if we extrapolate this to the real world, this is incredibly dangerous for public policy. If voters and politicians are driven by terrifying, highly available media images rather than actual statistical reality, we are going to misallocate all our resources. We'll spend billions fighting statistically rare things like shark attacks or terrorism and ignore the silent killers that are actually destroying society.
This brings us to a fascinating, broader philosophical debate within the field of risk assessment, primarily between Paul Slovic and the legal scholar Cass Sunstein. And I want to note, we're just looking at their philosophical arguments here, remaining strictly objective about the data.
So what does Sunstein argue?
Sunstein argues exactly your point. He believes that availability cascades, where a minor risk is amplified by the media into a public panic cause irrational policy. He believes that human bias is dangerous and that cold, calculating experts should shield public policy from populist, emotional excesses. He argues that we should regulate risks strictly by objective cost-benefit analyses, counting the exact number of life years saved per dollar spent, ignoring the public's emotional panic.
Which sounds very System 2, very logical. Put it in a spreadsheet. What does Slovic say to that?
Slovic fundamentally disagrees. Slovic argues that the public's emotional reaction to risk is entirely valid. He claims that objective risk is largely a myth invented by scientists. Risk is inherently a human construct. Slovic points out that the public has a much richer, more nuanced conception of risk than experts who just count dead bodies.
How so? What does the public see that the experts miss?
The public instinctively distinguishes between voluntary risks, like skiing, and involuntary risks, like chemical runoff in their water supply. They care about how painful a death is, not just the raw probability of it. Slovic believes that experts should not act as dictators, overriding the fears of the populace. He argues that in a democracy, policy must respect and reflect the emotional, System 1 priorities of the citizens, even if it isn't statistically perfectly efficient.
Wow. That is a massive philosophical divide. Sunstein wants to protect us from our own biases using math. Slovic wants to respect our biases because they make us human.
Precisely.
So, to synthesize this incredible journey we've been on today, the diagnostic landscape of the human mind is nothing like a clean, clear X-ray. It is muddy. We are not perfectly rational actors. We are driven by a fast associative System 1 that is highly suggestible, craves cognitive ease, jumps to massive conclusions based on WISIOD, what you see is all there is, and constantly substitutes hard questions for easy emotional ones. And all the while, our lazy, easily depleted System 2 just cosigns the illusions and tells us we are in control.
It is a delicate, flawed, but remarkably evolutionary machine. And I will leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Returning to that Slovic and Sunstein debate, it is something the source material forces us to confront. If our minds are indeed hardwired by millions of years of evolution to assess risk and make decisions using emotion, heuristics, and vivid imagery, is it actually wrong to govern society this way?
That's the billion-dollar question.
It is. Is the cold, statistical, System 2 approach of just counting life years saved actually missing a fundamental piece of human nature? Should we rely on the so-called wisdom of our deeply flawed intuitions because they reflect our true values? Or is our hardware too outdated for the modern world, meaning we must hand over the keys of society entirely to the statisticians and their spreadsheets?
It's a huge question, and you can't really answer it until you understand the machinery in your head. But hopefully with the toolkit we unpacked today, you're now a little better equipped to read the shadows on the wall.